So again, this is our adaptive challenge context map, and we're going to use this tool to work through what we learned about or heard about with our theme speaker this week about social media and sort of the Web 2.0 tools that are available to us in our congregations. Some of our congregations are using this well. Some of our congregations have websites that aren't even updated regularly. So I know there's a large continuum of experiences and settings and things that we have right now. So what we'll do is we'll start out with what is our overarching mission, or who is the moral owner, or what is the moral owner of our congregations in the context of what Meg Riley's been talking about this week.
To grow church.
To grow Unitarian Universalism?
Right, to grow, yeah.
Would the rest of you?
Connection, to connect with other people, even if they're not UUs, to provide services.
So we also have a goal that we can embed part of that in. So the overarching mission might be to spread the good news of Unitarian Universalism. So our goal on how to do that is there's creating connections with any sort of connections or connections of a certain kind.
I think especially the youth, the young adults, kids. I mean, she was talking about a video game.
Okay.
And so I know that we're targeting everybody that uses the social media.
Yeah, people who are home.
And so people who maybe aren't able to be in the bricks and mortar church.
Right. I know a guy who says he searches for sermons online and he's listing names of favorite people he searches for. And he doesn't go with the law. There's a bunch of churches in his area. He doesn't go to them. He got online sermons.
I kind of see it more as broad and deep. Because
So-
I've gotten a lot of inspiration from CLF website and that.
Excellent. So those are aspects of our goal that don't need to be fully formed at this point, but we want to have an idea of why we're doing it and sort of what direction we're going into for this particular aspect of our adaptive challenge. So we go next to what the context is. What's the setting or the situation of where our congregations are right now? So how would you describe the current situation or setting or context?
Well, in Kent, we don't have room in our brick and mortar space for many more people. So if we could reach some people electronically, that would be a way, as we're waiting to expand our bricks and mortars, is to keep growing.
And stay connected to people as they move away, but want to be part of the community.
Okay, so maintain existing connections. Or connections across geography, right?
Well, in time, I think people's availability for connections. You know, soccer games are now on Sunday. Parents can't always bring their kids, can't always participate at that time of day.
Or some people work on Sunday mornings.
Sure.
Yeah.
Like the original.
The challenge is trying to keep the people who don't have computers. Some people can't afford them. Some of the older generations can't or aren't interested in, you know what I mean? They don't want to learn. And it's we try to, send out an email and put this on the webpage, and it's just lost on those people.
So I don't know, I'm wondering if that's either a stakeholder or a competing commitment
Probably.
thing? Where do you think we should put that, there's the not interested in having access, and then there's the unable to have access for economic or other reasons?
I see that as kind of competing commitments. And that's not going to be solved through technology, those people.
So
Especially the older people.
the
you
no
know, my mother who would
access.
never.
And it almost makes them, separates them further. The people we're trying to bring in more, it almost separates them out.
So this reminds us that this isn't going to touch everybody in our community, or to be helpful to everyone in our community.
Well, there's no solution. There's not a solution.
There's not a solution.
Yeah.
So, which kind of reminds us that our goal of connections, that it's not that the bricks and mortar's going away, it's going to be a both and. We're looking for a both and kind of solution.
Both and, meaning bricks and mortar or online.
It's both and or.
Yeah, and rather
Right.
than one or the other, moving from one to another, both are.
But we're also using that goal and that setup that we have there as far as mission, et cetera. Are we making the assumption that we're focusing on technology? Or should we assume from that goal right there that we might do more than technology? Should we narrow this focus on this particular problem?
That's a really good question. I would say we want to broaden, we want to be on the balcony as much as possible as we're engaging with this, because we want to make sure that there's space for creative possibilities we haven't thought of yet. So at this part of our process, we don't want to narrow the possibilities. We want to narrow our scope around connections, perhaps, but not to narrow to just technology solutions.
Okay, good. Thank you for that clarification.
It's nice to spend some slow time with the model, because that's what I kind of want us to do. So, what about the other situation? And part of this is some of the stuff that's embedded in why we're having this conversation to begin with, such as millennials communicate with different platforms, for example.
I remember the early slides when I put up about I don't know the numbers, but how the percentages of people that are using Facebook and are connected, and the choice that they don't have to answer their email. They'll seek you out and find you.
And like, for example, my husband, he's in his 50s, didn't want a cell phone, didn't want to text, and then he sort of just hit that realization that this is how I communicate with my kids. If I'm not doing this, then I'm missing a connecting point with my kids. So he's gotten the fat thumbs out and has learned how to work the old cell phone.
Or whole generations who, we used to call them unchurched. They just don't have the experience of the brick and mortar church, and they're not really interested in that. That's the setting that I think we're in.
Unchurched is becoming the norm.
And so we have to speak their language.
Excellent. Anything else in our context or situation that we might want to keep in mind? And again, we can go back, and part of doing this is it's not like one part's done and then you can't go back to it. You can keep filling it in as other things come up. Yes?
What about the group of people that have been wounded by church, so that this is more of a back door to allow them to be more connected with spirituality?
That might be a stakeholder.
Okay.
People who want the content but aren't ready to re-engage the community. I'm thinking, so it's a not messy people, I'm just going to put down. Because because I don't know that it's the community that people are avoiding, but if you walk through the doors of a dysfunctional church, all the anxiety and stuff just leak. I mean, even if nobody says anything, you can tell that there's something going on from people's body language and things. So having that kind of experience in a congregation, I think we want to invite them into healthy congregations. We want to connect them somehow, some way to a community, but realizing that they're in different steps of that journey. And I think that's one thing Meg is really, part of Meg's message that I'm not sure everybody is hearing is it is all about people-to-people connections. It's not just people interfacing with their devices with ideas and thoughts on it. It's really about how do we connect with one another. But knowing that we need to make space for everybody on that continuum of readiness.
Thinking like a church leader, is finance an issue here as far as setting the situation?
Maybe a combination of finance and technical knowledge.
Did you show us something that was a continuum of readiness?
No,
Okay.
no. I just pulled that one out.
Okay, I was like,
Well, I'm thinking of, in the reality of today's, the mission field, if you will, what our evangelical cousins would call the mission field. People who we want to serve with our understanding of the best way of being in the world, and not. Some people will never walk through the doors of a church. Yes.
I have a question, which reflects the position of my particular fellowship. So Oberlin is a very small college town, and Oberlin really doesn't exist without the college. But one thing that we do have is we have a really rich exchange with the young adults on campus, the youth on campus, and it's a pretty vibrant group. Although it's a separate group, they're not really affiliated with our congregation, but we do liaison with them, and so we recognize being able to give services to those young adults as part of the mission of the fellowship. So technically, that group would be stakeholders, and we don't, is that correct?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Okay, and now we don't see them a lot all of the time because they have their own meetings on campus, although we do see some of them Sunday morning. So social media would be a really good way to make those connections.
Yeah. We can.
Okay, I know I'll get there. But how do church leaders, or how do you help the church leaders recognize the fact that just because you might not see that cohort on Sunday mornings, that the connections are still equally as important as the people that walk through the door?
That makes sense. So I would put that into the bucket of people or bucket of stakeholders of like para-church organizations, so that there's some sort of identity, UU identity, and maybe church of the larger fellowship members who aren't members of your church but live in your community. So there's para-church members. Maybe people who are members of the UU service committee who aren't, affiliated with your congregation, who have, haven't connected with your particular congregation, but you want to build connections with them. I would put campus ministry in there too.
Yeah.
And you're fortunate because you have a campus minister that's a Unitarian Universalist as well as the general campus minister. I think OU has the same, Ohio University has the same gift there, having that Unitarian Universalist sensibility. So how about, are there any ancestors that we might put into the stakeholder category in this case? And this is the idea, we talked a little bit about, in the case of the RE, going to intergenerational and going away from a separate RE program, the people who did the capital campaign to help build that RE wing would be ancestors, that would be stakeholders in their memory. We would be dishonoring the work that they did. Do you see any stakeholders in this, that kind of stakeholder in this? What group?
Well, anytime you take church resources from one area, whatever the ongoing program is, if you are thinking of going into technology, and there will be resources going that way, you're balancing.
So for lack of a better term, it being Thursday, resource losers, the programming.
That part of the pie that's going to get smaller.
Resource,
and I think, and to horribly generalize here, a lot of older members, more traditional church people, perhaps, might see, they don't do technology, so if resources are going in that area, they'll need to be brought along.
so the people who would never use the new resources, perhaps. So,
But they're giving a lot.
Right.
Yeah, they're giving a lot.
They're giving, but they're not seeing.
Yeah,
And
how are they going to
they
feel
aren't
that this
even
is
coming
valuable?
to church.
In my place, they built the sanctuary, they bought the chairs, and they're funding the music program, which is highly.
Right.
so so we can even say the funders of the bricks and mortar. That's excellent. I set this table, now nobody wants to come.
The sort of new generation who are really into technology, they're a stakeholder too. They can see themselves being the winners in this discussion. But sometimes that dialogue isn't real comfortable. There isn't even a dialogue.
I'm gonna put that up in
People who
work
do it.
avoidance, actually. I mean, so the starting that dialogue is gonna be uncomfortable.
And I think a lot of those people who might be church leaders who struggled with budget issues over the years, I'm thinking of someone in particular in my church, I can just hear him. Yeah, but how are you going to pay the minister? He'd look over his glasses and look at you and say, if you're taking this money from, yeah, these college kids, yeah, they may watch it online, but how are you going to pay the minister, Kathy? I mean, I'd have to have a good discussion.
So competing commitments are other budget
Yeah.
items. Because even though a lot of the stuff out there is free, you still, wiring the church for internet, especially in the old church buildings, we have a hard enough time getting grounded outlets in
Right.
places that.
I'd like to suggest that another stakeholder would be almost anyone who is, I don't want to use the word seeking, it's almost feeling a spiritual void. That could be someone in the congregation, it could be someone going through a personal crisis, it could be someone who's not in the congregation, who's going through a personal crisis and looking for a community.
So maybe just people who need what we have to offer? Is that generic enough?
That's pretty generic.
Who need our saving message, how about that? We'll just,
Okay.
we'll bump
There
up
we
the
go.
language.
Make it really-
Good news.
Need our good news, okay.
Does that also include those that need our collective power? I mean, we have what some people need, but we also need what some people have, and I'm thinking the disenfranchised. has the social justice. I think it does.
So this, we need our good news, but also our agency, maybe?
And
That-
actions.
Agency and actions. For example, is the way we partnered with folks in Phoenix, with some of the local groups, that we were able to bring our own.
And even as we say agency, the humility of knowing we need to partner.
Yeah. Maybe it's a competing commitment, the humility versus power versus humility. And actually, that might even play into the generational bit. If you have a leadership group who have done stuff a certain way, for them to be able to have the humility to realize that things are changing, and even though this worked for us, we're in a different context now, and to be able to not be in the knowing place anymore. I mean, that's the big thing with adaptive leadership, is that you have to have the humility to say, I don't know, or as Meg was saying, to celebrate the mistakes at the end of the day, because these are things that we learned. So. Let's see. That's a pretty good list. How about some more work avoidance things? What are the work avoidance of not maybe starting the dialogue between some of the constituencies or stakeholders?
Assuming lack of resource.
Assuming lack of resource.
Fear. I'm thinking about that in terms of what we were saying here about people who need our good news and our social witness. Things like, who are those non-users of resource? Who are the people, who are the people who are unchurched? Who are those people? Do we really, are those people we really want to bring in?
That might be a competing commitment of our church will change if we invite.
Yeah,
If
that's
we-
where I'm headed. Okay, yes. So how will this change us?
Let's change us and our comfort.
Under work avoidance, we often talked about this at our congregation. It's almost a feeling is that we don't really deserve something better. We're kind of the poor little shoddy church that, we've gotten along okay doing that. But it's like, we can't envision ourselves in a different place. We're getting over that. It's an underlying,
It's been the elephant in the living room in your church for a long, long, hasn't
yeah,
it?
yeah.
Another thing I've seen is it's really an open source ethos that we're inviting in, and then there's the control that leadership wants to have at the same time. So for example, Kent just went with a WordPress platform for their website so that people can go in and update their own pages. I can do that on my Surge website. I can go in and add content and things up to a certain point. I also work with other districts and I don't have that same ability, and there's a problem with the communication, having the sort of the playing telephone. I'll ask somebody to put something on the website and it won't get on there quite the way that makes sense, and I have to go through the chain of command, if you will, to get it to happen. And of course, you have part-timers and volunteers, so it's not like they, Beth Casebold, our district administrator is an exception, because then you could just do something at 2 in the morning and she'll respond. She's awesome. But for the most part, that's not what happens. You know, it's 2 or 3 days later or a week later. So there's sort of that institutional resistance to the Web 2.0 ethos. Does that make sense? So I'm not blaming any person, it's more systemic. What is it, that here comes everybody idea. And this is, I should mention that, this is, when I do leadership development stuff, I'm really pushing up against this and stuff that I do, and it's uncomfortable for a lot of institutional, and I'm an institutionalist, but the institution has to change. So what can we, if this is really solid, our goal and our center, and we hold people accountable to that, then we can allow them more latitude in how they express and how it can look on our websites and things like that. So some things like your logo. You know, we want that little flame, you know, the UU flaming chalice. There's certain, you know, things about how it needs to look and stuff, just to keep that consistency. You know, there's some things you want a little bit of control over, but, you know, chalice lightings or a liturgy or whatever, you want to have a lot of latitude.
It's almost like we had an interim minister who chose things like dropping a stone in a bowl of water and watching the ripples instead of lighting a chalice. And, you know, she just challenged things that we considered our basic way of doing it, to say there was other ways you can symbolize similar concepts. And it's almost like you need to have an interim minister go to churches and show them there's other ways to do church, and then make sure that we're not leaving people out if we, you know, want to participate in that part of it.
One of the things in our history is there's a sermon by Theodore Parker called "The Permanent and the Transient in Christianity." But that's sort of part of our struggle, is what's really permanent, what's the core, and then what's just our cultural expression of that at this period in time. So, you know, the beloved hymns that we have now in the Gray Hymnal, which are based on Protestant hymns going back 100 years, you know, come to find out some of them were drinking songs. And so, you know, fast forward to, you know, modern music, and I know that First Unitarian Rochester, they have a Saturday night service, and they'll sing like Beatles songs and stuff as part of their, instead of hymns, and they'll project the words up and stuff. And so there's this, and you know, and I see my kids, you know, the Beatles was sort of old when I was, yeah, the Beatles, okay, yeah, they were great, but you know, they're done. And they love the Beatles, they're on their iPods, and it's like, what is up with that? But it's part of it is that there's something about that music that really speaks to something that's part of our cultural expression these days that maybe seemed old to me, but there's something there that they grasp onto. Yes?
I like to dance last night, and the music that the U-tones play, and to watch all the generations come together and share in that music and just enjoy it, rather than, oh geez, that's my parents' old stuff. It's just always a joy for me to see that all the generations just coming together and just having a good time.
Well, it helps we have a generation that's entering elderhood who doesn't think they're getting old.
Going in, fighting and screaming.
That's right, we're never going to die. Where generations before that, you know, elderhood was something where you just shifted into a different way of being in the world. And anyway, we're getting off track. So, well, we've got some stuff filled in there. How about in our congregations, our formal and our informal authority as we approach this this goal of connecting people in order to grow our faith. So how many of you are on your board of trustees? Okay. So if you're on the board, how many of you are on communication committees? Adult religious education? Worship? Sunday service, for those of you who don't do worship, and but come over. So there's those formal things. How many of you in your congregations, when you talk about something, people listen to you? You're not marginalized. So you have some convening authority, which is helpful. So there's that. For me, because I was an engineer in my first career and I have this geeky kind of technical aspect to it, that's part of my, people assume I can do things I can't do because it's techie sometimes, but when I talk about technological stuff, people tend to listen to me more so than someone else because they know that I work in that. So some of it might just be your own experience and your past work in the church. So if somebody was on the committee on ministry at one time, or has worked with children, or been on the finance committee, so there's maybe past roles is a way of putting it.
I have folks come to me and assume I know everything about RE, and I'm just learning right along with them. But
Good example.
Our young adults and youth who are some of our most avid technology users.
Yep. So
I love Meg's idea about having those people offer their services as fundraisers for the church. That will go into our service auction.
that sounds
and then they
great.
get to know each other.
Yes, oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
They're humans.
Yeah.
The youth are humans.
Connor did a blog, and people were like for the middle school stuff, so he could like do a blog, how to set up a blog thing. Yeah, that'd be great. So, how about some uncertainties? Things that are important, but we're not quite sure where to put them, or things that should be on our radar.
And things are moving so fast, will this be there if we invest in it? Like, what's the staying, because things are
Yeah.
possible, the next thing we.
So where are we on the curve of change, sort of?
Yeah.
Or where are we in the...
If you're making an investment in an industry that's changing so quickly, you don't know if the new thing will wipe out Facebook is hot now, but how long will that be?
By the time we raise enough money to buy the technology, it's old.
Will it be something else that replaces it in cultural dominance?
Yeah. We don't want to be wiring our church with new phone lines, for example. Or even landlines, the local access network lines. In fact, my son, when he went to college, he had a desktop computer, and that's old school. They didn't have a hard plug, a LAN plug for him to get internet. He had to buy an internet card to plug into his computer.
Some houses are wired for, what's that kind of TV that requires a wire
cable
to go through-
TV.
Right, when now people watch things on their laptops and wiring your house is kind of becoming obsolete.
So that's a huge uncertainty. And another uncertainty is, and this is kind of a hard question. But is church becoming obsolete in general? The way we've organized ourselves, and the whole studies in religion. Is it because that our manifestations of church aren't healthy enough where the people want to be a part of them, or is the whole idea of religion in that traditional sense becoming passé? So
Which is
that's
real scary if we're going into a capital campaign.
yeah. So
Bricks and mortars.
the future of
Sunday morning.
church.
We could also look at education, how, we get all these ads about have your child get online to get his education, high school education. I see that, and I worry about my job.
Yeah,
for the
Everything's
future.
changing.
Yeah. So now that we've played with some of this, let's play around with some metaphors that help to frame this problem. So this again is the something that'll engage with the right side of our brain as we talk about it, and also sort of serve as a shorthand as we're talking about that problem, and then you go into a 5-minute explanation. You want to be able to have a nice little way of referring to it. And this is sort of a brains, actually, let me go ahead and do this on the flip chart before we do the permanence of the whiteboard, right? At least this way we can see what we come up with. So what are some metaphors that you think that might speak to this?
The rabbit and the hare?
Rabbit and hare? Like it.
We talk about riding the technology train. As it rolls on through, is everybody on? Can we get on?
Keeps on a rolling.
Yes, exactly.
Really, I'm thinking of a pot with things bubbling up.
And so the pot's bubbling over?
Yeah, well, it's
Or-
like these ideas, these things that dominate are kind of like big bubbles, and some of them stay for a while, and some of them pop. Just, it's hard to make an investment in. So it's kind of like churches is a bowl, a cup of soup, you know, where you've got different things that can float and dominate. It's all part of the pot.
I've got a mixture of a greenhouse and a seminary, and I think it's because of the ongoing nature of having, having to learn how to even do this as you're trying to give the history and be futuristic. I don't know what that.
You know what?
Planting for the future.
Let's go ahead, Leah, let's sit on that, because I'm seeing a pattern here, so I want to respond, but I'm not going to do it yet, because I don't want to stop the conversation. Other thoughts about metaphors?
To me, thinking of riding the technology train seems too old school. To me, it's more like a comet, you know, something that is
Yes.
really out there,
Moving,
chaotic,
yeah.
who knows where it's going or
There you
how
go.
long it'll last.
Or a surfboard,
Yes.
that trying to, be on the wave. That's a story in Imagine, by the way, about an autistic kid who's this amazing surfer in Hawaii.
I'm trying to think of how we might use a metaphor about transition and the resistance to change. And the only thing that keeps coming up for me is what I've heard the Japanese do with their old family members, take them to the top of the mountain and leave them. And I think a lot of older people in our churches have that fear that we're just going to leave them.
Okay. So the fear of being left behind on the mountain?
Yeah.
The left behind.
Left on the mountain to die, I'll put.
Okay.
Left behind, unfortunately, has other connotations. Actually, I'm even thinking there's the Sisyphus rolling it up the hill only to have it come back down. But well, it's like that the model of conflict transformation that, I'm sorry, I should give you a folder. This is a folder of materials we've had so far this week. In the conflict transformation model, there's that cyclical kind of thing. So it's, you're never going to be able to rest because you're always going to have to respond, that kind of idea. Which I think some of these are getting to that we always have to be on our game.
It's that anxiety of never knowing if you're good enough or you've got enough. That kind of thing. Is that what you're thinking?
I'm thinking more of the how businesses get stagnant, or you're on a project and it starts getting stale. It's like if you start getting stale, you're going to die. It's like staleness isn't going to be an option anymore.
In education, it's a horrible name, continuous improvement. But you always have to,
Yeah.
Well, that's from a while back.
oh, it's
And it's still, it's always true though.
No child left behind, that's a big
Yeah.
buzz phrase.
I don't know what the metaphor would be, but we have a foot and an arm in the future, and yet we're trying to make sure that we keep the people behind us with us. You know, we're forging into the future and kind of leaving in the dust, and we don't want to do, you know, the last thing we want to do is leave, because that's our mission, is to not let folks be marginalized. And so as we blast into the future, you know, are we, well, we're going. You know, if you can't come,
Crack
And
the whip.
and
A
it's-
game of crack the whip. You
Yes.
think about that, there's the person at the front or the people at the
Yeah.
front, and they've got the momentum, and the people behind, it's like, whoa.
and it's our mission and our purpose to be inclusive and to find a way to keep bridging those gaps and not say, well, you know what, this is the future, we're going. You know, we can't,
It's not fast moving, but I'm envisioning a spider plant and how they send out these, tendrils that start new. And this online community seems like one of those shoots that grows into a community, but you worry about it breaking off and forming a new plant, and where you lose income to your brick and mortar, or your minister, or your staff, or really, not that spider plants, it isn't a perfect metaphor, but just that concept of will something break off and
Actually, I love the spider plant metaphor. I'm going to probably use that going forward if you don't mind. With some of the things I talk about, so that birthing new versions of yourself.
It's not moving like a comet, and that's part of the, you need a three-dimensional computerized spider plant that.
So we've,
right, she's
Ever-changing.
Yeah.
so I think we're capturing something in these, this sense of disequilibrium, which is good because that's what we want to be in when we're doing in that adaptive leadership learning mode. The greenhouse and seminary, Susan, I'm thinking might actually be a better metaphor for how we address the problem. There's a second metaphor thing, and I kind of want to put that on the shelf or in the parking lot or the bike rack or whatever we want to call it, to because I think that might be something that is more of the solution rather than. But I don't know, that's just my feeling. I'm hearing all this anxiety and all these other metaphors. Is there one that speaks to, let's vote, I've got dots, we could do dots. No, I'm just kidding. Have any of you done the gathered here thing where you have to put the dots on stuff? Yeah. It's like, if I never see another dot again. So let's just have a little old-fashioned vote, and we'll, for the sake of the exercise. Who likes the rabbit in the hair?
Can we only vote for one?
How about you can vote for two? Okay, rabbit in the hair.
Can you give us a second to look
Okay,
at
yeah,
it?
rabbit in the hair. Actually, a nice contrasting colors. Okay, ready?
We're gonna vote for him.
Two. Favorite two. Rabbit in hair.
Can we put two votes into one if we have two votes?
Yes. So, rabbit in hair. Riding the technology comet. Ideas bubbling up in the pot with some having staying power and others just going pop and disappearing. The combination greenhouse seminary. Fear of someone being left on the mountain to die. Continuous improvement. The crack the whip game. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The spider plant. 1, 2. So it looks like we've got crack the whip for today. That'll change, of course, because the class will be over.
That's because good tomorrow.
Yeah. Crack the whip. Okay, so we got crack the whip.
We'll have committee meeting. Or three.
what you're saying.
Send it to a task force then.
So I'm going to take a picture of this before I erase it, so that we'll have it for forever and for all time. Whoops.
Look at you using technology.
Isn't that something? If I were really crazy, I would you could send it to my computer if my internet were on.
You're just reading glass stripes.
Actually, I'll go ahead on the next one. So if you flip your paper over,
Yeah, this is the. These are just brains.
I love this whiteboard thing. This is just.
The schools use computerized whiteboards.
Yes,
those are cool.
Isn't that awesome? Okay, we'll move this out of the way.
Yeah.
So what I want to start with is coming up with a powerful question around what the challenge is. So this is that exercise we did, I don't know how many days ago. Maybe it was yesterday. I think it might have been. Well, you did that for your case studies too, so. So keeping in mind what we've talked about so far, and that this idea of connections, and maybe it would be helpful to, let me see if I can work the technology and pull it up. Oops. Gosh, maybe not. Thought it might be nice to have you see what we did already, but see, if this were like the classroom of my dreams, you'd all have your iPads or whatever, and I could just send it to you so you'd have it on your screen. But I'll just have to look it up as we do it, unfortunately. Okay. So the powerful question about this. So what's a question that inspires creativity, that has a larger context, a how question or a what question. And again, it doesn't have to be perfect to begin with.
Well, I'll just throw one out,
Okay.
but I think I'm already trying to make modifications to it already, so. How can we make the church more relevant in the 21st century? I don't like the word relevant right away, and I'm not sure we want to look too far in advance. I think that may be one of the things we want to talk
So
about.
relevant in 21st century are, but we have the starting idea out there. The we is also, who's the we, might be another. That might be good to be in the question, but there's some,
Right.
there's an implication about whose work is it in the
Right.
we.
Too much ownership and not enough publicity.
Does somebody else have a different question we can put up there? Because sometimes we can come up with a third question from a couple of different questions.
How can technology how can technology it was along the lines of how can technology help us to be more inclusive and enhance our outreach and inreach, you know what I mean? And we use it as a tool to not only reach out more, but to expand us individually and spiritually.
And grow each of us.
There you go.
So the inclusive is we love that word, right?
Yeah.
And that grow, that faith formation, however you want to articulate that, deepening ourselves, becoming more fully human, depending on what your theology is.
Well, the phrase deeper and broader also is a short cut for that, or
A different question to put up there?
Sort of the same thing, but I always like using the beloved community. That's, how can the beloved community grow deeper and broader?
Enhance the, use it as a tool.
And then one of the answers would be, one of the methods would be technology.
So remembering that one aspect of a powerful question is it invites more questions. So that's good that you're sort of getting on, is there another balcony one higher up than where we are right now? So that's good. I'm thinking what might be helpful is maybe if we split into pairs and just play around with what's up there and see if you can come up with a powerful question, just one-on-one, because I think that'll help each one of us engage with it.
Because it wouldn't be, would it?
So how can we
Maintain and strengthen out connection with emerging technology or emerging ways of worship? Or building the beloved community. Maybe worship sounds too Christian.
Did you?
How can the beloved community grow deeper and broader while actively engaging the future? I see holding onto that table. Or that'd be me if they
Strong
that
connected
in.
material is what I'm thinking.
Deeper and broader. What was the last part?
While actively engaging the future. So Renee, at this point, we're still being very general.
Yes. One thing that, with the engaging the future, it seems like there needs to be an honoring the past counterpart to that speaks to some of the anxiety, that crack the whip kind of thing. As a friendly amendment.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Yeah, read that down. Friendly amendment.
That was
Loving amendment.
My friendly phrase, and I don't know where it goes, but it seems like technology is giving voice to the liberally religious voice. It's a voice, and it's kind of what we're about giving voice to. Our relevance in society. Are we relevant?
Thus being voiced. Thus. We could just add a clause.
Unspoken clause.
Next year at SI, there should be a workshop on creating a language that is completely and totally unoffensive to anyone. It'll just be a series of grunts.
Or maybe.
Except grunting is really offensive to me.
Except for like lifting weights.
What about those who can't grunt?
Oh, no.
I think we need to stay focused on what our goal and mission are.
Okay.
Because we seem to be getting
Repeat
We're almost-
that.
So,
Oh,
And
yeah.
that's why I asked the question, like,
Right.
is it broad or is it focusing in at this connections?
that's good though. Let's go back to our goal and our mission and see how these questions are, if
Yeah, okay.
they include the direction that we need to meet, to engage with those goals. So, the worship, not necessarily, because the worship, I mean, there's connections through worship, but worship is, there's other ways to connect besides worship.
I'm going to advocate for the first one because the reason I like it, I mean, first, I oftentimes don't know what I'm thinking until it comes out of my mouth. But what I like about it is that it avoids most assumptions. Not all, but most. It doesn't assume that anyone should be left behind. It doesn't assume that anyone will be left behind. It doesn't assume that there's one right answer. It opens the doors to lots of possibilities. Anyone can start getting excited again.
It's okay to have assumptions, you just want to make sure that they're assumptions that you want to have embedded. So the beloved community is an assumption that I think we're agreed that we want to have. That's an okay assumption to have embedded.
Okay.
But
I've struggled with that phrase, because to me, it seems like I didn't take a workshop on it, and I didn't know what it meant or where it came from, and I wasn't sure if it was something old-fashioned or if it was a buzzword for something I didn't understand. But if you just take it at point blank, face value, it works, but it's unusual language. I mean, if it were something we were posting publicly, there's certain words that come up every once in a while, you know, that it's like, everybody knows what that means, but me, you know, and maybe they had a workshop on it or something.
You almost wonder if it ought to be cap letters, you know, capital B, capital C. Because is it a buzzword for something I
Is
don't
there a
know?
story that I haven't heard? Yeah, like a fable
Or is it exclusive? Is it
Yes.
the beloved community as opposed to the?
beloved is just an unusual word. And I know it means a lot to people in our congregation. They use it and they smile and they nod, like it touches them deeply. And so I feel like I wasn't at that sermon or something, and I wanted to catch up. But I've gotten more used to it over the years. But I'm just trying to put myself in the position of a young person who's new, that as I was not, well, yeah, it was a while ago, but the language was still there, and it's still, initially, it wasn't a stumbling block, but it gave me pause.
You don't hear anybody under the age of 50 using the word beloved.
I don't know. I call my sweetie beloved.
It's a poetic term. And
So, and this is where, to being a blogger, I could hyperlink that to the definition so that somebody could, if they didn't know what that meant, they could, and I don't know that I necessarily would have ever done that, except that, I wasn't in beginner's mind around that term.
Well,
so.
and there's lots of people who I'm good friends with at the church that use that in reference to kind of talking about church, you know. Liz Erickson uses the term a lot.
It's kind of it's a term to refer to something that we know is unattainable, but it's still our highest ideal.
And I wouldn't have thought of that unattainable concept.
So
But what a wonderful discussion we just had.
Yeah.
I always like putting in
Yeah.
one phrase, one word that people are like, some people would be like,
Gives you pause.
and then it's like, let's have that discussion.
Because what this is
We
it's,
did that
it's
in
our
our
non-theistic
mission
term for the kingdom of God. And so,
In the hopes that one day, all of creation, animals, people, will become one beloved
See,
community.
there is a story.
harmony and
There is
unity.
there is a
See,
story.
this is escalating.
Curves
I don't mean to be on a sidetrack.
That's it.
And it can even be broken down further. Well, how do you get there? Well, one little bullet point might be, well, you have to engage a congregation in examining their unexamined privilege, their white privilege. Whoa, that suddenly makes it very concrete and uncomfortable. But the kingdom of God, can't use that word. That doesn't mean anything to me. at some point it was translated down to,
King and God, those two things have assumptions embedded in them that we don't necessarily theologically,
and that's really helpful in that we have so many different people entering this stream at different points with different histories.
Can someone find that, the quote that Reverend Steve shared this morning about the web of life? Someone find that for me. Because that's how I'm relating to this, the beloved community, when you're saying animals, just everything, plants.
I think we've expanded the term of beloved community to include the interconnected web. The first time I really heard this term used, and it could be earlier, but Martin Luther King Jr. talks about the beloved community. That term is used throughout his writings and speeches and stuff. And a lot of the liberal theologians have used that. So James Luther Adams, I think, might have used it. I know that Richard Gilbert has, Dick Gilbert. So
I'm sorry to take you on a tangent.
no, that's
But I
good.
think
It's good to think of that, because part of it is knowing that we need to have those conversations, because, again, back to this unchurched, or the unchurched, to not make assumptions about theological language. Or it was in this class when somebody was talking about the Russian immigrant, or maybe it was the afternoon version, but about what do you mean by faith? What do you mean by worship? We use the same words, but they have different meanings for different people, and let's have the conversation about what those words mean. So having that be part of it, I mean, that's part of the connections and communications, how rich that is. If we've had that conversation, we've connected at a deeper level.
you don't want things watered down so that they lose all their poetry. But you want things that are rich and are deep and broad.
I don't know that we're talking about discarding that, but it's looking at it with beginner's eyes is really helpful.
I really like the simplicity, getting back to of the first one, because it is very, it seems more on task, and I have a tendency to go off.
Hey, Carol, I think what we're going to do tomorrow is just continue to work together. I don't know that there's enough time to really give time and space to your own case study unless you really want to do it. So don't consider it to be an assignment, but if you have something you want to come in that we can work together, we'll do it as a group, I think.
So, if we do the homework that you haven't assigned,
Yeah.
we can come in with questions.
You can come in and we can bring the wisdom of the group to it. Yes. Okay, thanks. Okay, I'm sorry, Susan, I just wanted to catch Carol before she went out.
I'm ready.
Can you repeat what you said about examine their, we can do it after class. Go ahead, Renee.
That's all right, I just wanted to make sure that, because since I switched the assignment, I didn't want the person who left to do the homework and everyone else saying, ha ha, you were up till 2 in the morning.
Exactly.
It looks kind of like a spider from a distance. Do we have any more spider metaphors?
Oh, the chart?
Yeah, it does.
The lines.
Or wise
Brother.
So I want to just check in. Was this helpful to work? I mean, I know we have to do this other part, the solution-y part of it, but was this helpful doing it as a group? Is it?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes.
I guess, at this point, when do you start honing in? I mean, these are still really broad.
This is really broad.
Yeah.
Right.
So if we use number 1, how do we generate more excitement about spreading goodness?
Good news.
And good news.
Yeah,
Which is
sorry.
goodness, of course. Are we going to, say, well, technology is this answer, and then you spend the rest of this working on that? How do you get to the more?
So the powerful question is what you use with the community to engage with it. so that you can open up, so you can, whose work is it? Who are the partners in the work? That powerful question is part of the invitation of the community into our highest values.
When you say community, are you speaking of our beloved community? You would do this,
I'm
who
speaking
would do this work? Do you
flesh and blood
recommend?
people in your congregation.
But do you see this as something that a board would do, or a task force, or, I mean,
Yes, but we have to figure out whose work is it first.
on each particular, this would be a format that many groups could use.
Right. So we as the people who see the problem, the leaders who see the problem. So one thing that might be embedded in this is older members of the congregation who might be holding purse strings, figuring out how to work with them to either turn up the heat or make them feel safe with a holding environment. So this is all sort of the process, us being strategic about how we can create conversations that point to our transcendent, what we want to look like at the end of it, or what direction we want to be heading, so that people can engage with the challenge faithfully.
So a leadership group would work through this. I'm just trying to make this
Yeah,
clear in my own
I know.
mind.
Yeah.
A leadership group would work through this and determine whose work it is. And so then you might have an older member with purse strings, a young adult with technical knowledge. Then you would formulate the task force who would actually do the work.
Right. I see this process as being done by one of those balcony committees, such as the Committee on Ministry, Long Range Planning, the board, if there's a growth committee, that's sort of the minister, absolutely. And a lot of ministers are getting this kind of training, so, but I believe the lay leaders need it as a tool as well, so.
So this is like pre-work work.
Yeah, this is pre-work work, and what basically happens is you come up with ideas for low risk, high learning interventions. So you find out that, for example, the church website, if we we just redid ours, we had a partner of someone who knew how to do that. We had a partner in a staff person who's willing to make sure it's updated rather than a volunteer. If we had some congregations have webmasters who have run the web from back in the old HTML days and have a sense of ownership of it that's not healthy for the larger direction of the powerful question. So that's someone that, there's some work there that needs to happen. That person needs to be part of the conversation of getting them up on the balcony somehow, some way, or else the leadership needs to do some interventions that might be painful, of really letting that person know that we feel that your ownership of this is unhealthy and it's not serving the greater mission of the congregation. Hopefully you can bring them along, but if you see that, bottom line is, if you really see that this is preventing the congregation from serving its mission, then the leaders have to make harder choices. But this is a way of doing it, I think, in a way that's faithful to including as many voices as you can. So the other partners are the people at the margins who might be able to bring their creativity into the solution. The young adults, for example, we talked about, or even the youth.
This is so strategic.
Yes.
Making a change in ways that changes often are.
And it's complicated, so it's not a cut and dry thing.
It takes time, yeah.
Oh, you know what I was going to do? I wrote myself a note. I wanted to print off the narrative form of this for those of you who think more of a narrative. So,
We're about to redo our mission and vision
goods.
statements and create a covenant. So this may be a good working tool for the team, the mission development team. Just another way to broaden the scope and a different way to really look at it, and to be sure that we look at each of those pieces of it before we forge forward, that we're not, this process brings up just all sorts of things that, you know, you have the 18 steps of creating your mission and vision, which are, you know, kind of cut and dry, but this really opens up people's minds and gets them to see it from so many different perspectives.
I might actually use this for the implementation of the mission. We have another tool, different workshop, it's all, but called what is it called? Learning, anyway, there's a thing that, you do a lot of the same things. You look at competing commitments, you look at what your values are, which are helpful for a mission statement. So there's another process that's similar. This, I think, is better for interventions.
Okay.
Where, but you're right, that's what that's part of it. We don't always think about these peripheral situations. We don't hold up what our competing commitments are. I mean, we don't do it as people, right? I love to eat, and I also don't want to be heavy. Those are competing commitments.